slide 23, you'll see that as a department, we actually came up with specific notes verbiage to use when you are opening and closing an IEP to preserve the date. So you will actually see highlighted there an exact quotation that we would want you to embed into the notes if you were opening and closing. So my question to the panel here is, why is it important that teams use this specific verbiage in these instances?
Michelle, I think it's important that we use the specific verbiage because the first and second lines are very important. It identifies the type of meeting that was being held, and it says the team was ready, willing, and able to hold the meeting at that point in time. It is clear that the school was ready to meet and that it was the parent who was not able to meet at that moment.
I think another reason too is that you know, we're up against a timeline many of the times when we hold these IEPs, and we do not want to be late for an IEP because a parent was unable to attend. So another reason why we want to include this statement is because we're telling the team or informing the parent exactly what we did. We extended the service dates along, and we changed the info eligibility dates on the dates on the info eligibility page to make sure that we are not late for our IEPs, but we're not taking any other actions. We're not changing anything in regards to the student's IEP. We're just making sure that we are compliant.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I did want to also add, I know we're not talking procedure here, but I think I have to give this one little plug as well. This is not a permission slip to, if you realize the day before your IEP, ooh, that one's due tomorrow, to open and close an IEP. Notice the bullet, the very first bullet there. If you're up against an IEP deadline and the parent does not show after attempts to reach the parent, then you only want to embed that if you have done your part in notifying the parent ahead of time and preparing the IEP so that it is ready to present.
And make sure you actually hold that meeting afterward. It says that the team will reconvene, and then that resets your dates. So it's not going to appear that you're overdue with dates in the system, but you need to hold that meeting as soon as possible after you say that you're going to reconvene, because that's going to cause all kinds of problems. You're not actually going to have a consented to IEP, and you're going to have to continue operating on an old IEP. So while it may not show that you are out of compliance, you actually are.
So we're going to go continue along the collaborative IEP agenda. We are on the section where you would review procedural safeguards. And this is important that this is added on every notes page. So my question to you is, how does the notes documentation suggested on this slide ensure legal compliance?
Well, I think one important element is that we're documenting that we provided a copy to the parents first and foremost. Either if we're holding a virtual meeting, that we emailed a copy to the parents prior to the meeting, because the parent does have to receive a copy of that anytime to hold an IEP or take any kind of action. So it's important that we're documenting that they're receiving a copy. It's also very important to document that they were offered an overview of their rights and provided the opportunity to ask any questions if they had them.
Brian, one thing that I always think about when I'm thinking about when you're saying that the parent was offered an overview of their rights versus a parent was provided an overview of their rights. And quite often I see that we always put in, or we always remember to put in, that we offered them the overview. But I think occasionally we forget to put that we provided them, or parent declined an overview and stated they were aware of their rights. So we should have a statement in parent response to the rights as well, showing whether or not they had questions and our attempts to answer them and to clarify their rights for them.
I know in addressing parents' questions regarding the procedural safeguards, I know there was one instance where I had a parent who had lots of questions. So what we chose to document in the notes is that we went page by page through the procedural safeguards with the parent, because it demonstrated how we addressed each of the questions. And in this case, the parent had a question on every single page.
So a couple of months back, I did an IEP where I did check that the meeting was a triennial, and it was a triennial and an annual. And so that caused all kinds of problems, obviously, because I had to go back and make sure it was documented the right way, and it was a big mess. So I understand that it's important to make sure we have the right kind of meeting documented on the info eligibility page, right? Because that's what actually drives our dates and timelines. But why is important, or is it important to document the purpose of the meeting on the meeting notes page if it's documented there?
Brian, that's an excellent question. I think it's really important that we document on there because it ensures that we have shared with the parent the purpose of the meeting, right? So the parents know that they're coming to an IEP, but they don't always know that it's what type of IEP, because they come to an IEP on a yearly basis, and sometimes they're not clear that it's a triennial as well, or an amendment IEP. So it's important to document the type of meeting on the IEP to show that we have reviewed that with the parent.
Audrey, another example I think of is where we have multiple meetings to complete an annual. And when you're pulling all the sets of notes, having it really clear in the notes, this was an annual part 2, annual part 3. Then when you're lining them up, it's really clear to see the process and what was occurring at each of those meetings.
In every IEP notes page, we also try and document the time parameters, how long we have for the IEP meeting. Obviously, that's important so that whoever reads those notes knows exactly how long the team had planned to go, and it's important to document that we had that discussion with the parent. Do you think it's also important to document in the notes page if a single team member needs to leave early, or what time they need to leave?
Oh, Brian, I've run into this where we have offered a parent the opportunity to excuse a team member or to stop and reconvene when that team member can join the team again. And we have had the parent verbally say in the meeting, yes, I excuse that team member. And we did not hand them the excusal to sign right at that moment. We documented it in the notes. Parent agreed to excuse this team member, team agrees to get back together. Following the meeting, we forgot to send them that excusal. So the only documentation we had that team member had been excused by the parent and administrator was in the notes. So sometimes when things pop up in the meeting, the notes really can help you to defend what occurred during that meeting.
That's a great point. I also like the idea of telling the parent ahead of time, because that gives that person a notice. Say, for example, that one of the team members has to leave and they're only going to make it through the first half hour of the meeting. The parent really should be given the choice at the beginning of that meeting if they would rather postpone and reschedule at a time when the entire IEP team can be there. So I think it's a courtesy for the parent to let them know as soon as you know the information.
Mm-hmm. And if you have that time parameters component on your IEP meeting notes template, again, we've talked about using that notes template also as an agenda functionally. It's important to remember that right at the beginning. It's important to have it and document right in the beginning. I mean, I've certainly had IEP meetings where we got to the end of somebody's time parameter that was in their head, and they said, "Oh, I have to be out of here in 5 minutes," and we're only halfway through the present levels page, and we haven't discussed that we're going to be ending, and so everybody's thrown for a loop. So it's important. It's a helpful reminder to have that there in the beginning, I think.
Let's talk a moment about reviewing assessment reports and how you might want to document the review of those in the IEP. Is it enough just to check the box at the end of the IEP that the parent received a copy of the report? What do you guys do? How do you document in the notes that you reviewed it and what happened?
John, that's a good question. I like to document in the notes each service provider, including the psychologist assessment as well, each report that was reviewed, any key points from that assessment, I like to document that. And then if there's questions the parent has or any team member has, I document that information as well and the discussion that followed, just to show that we have clearly went through the assessment and discussed it, and that especially if a parent has questions, I would definitely want to document the parents' questions and how the team responded to the questions to make sure that we've addressed their concerns.
Yeah, I think documenting those parent questions is key because it documents that the parent had the opportunity to participate and engage with the assessment report. Obviously, we don't need to add everything from the assessment report. That's what the assessment report's for. But a little bit of key information and documentation and participation and engagement in that process is good to be documented in the notes.
So for a follow-up question, have you ever written in the notes that the parent was given a copy of their assessment report?
You know, that's a good question. I haven't done that, but that is because we usually check that box, but that's a good idea to show that the parent was given a copy of the IEP, especially like when the team is reviewing the IEP, the parent can have a copy in front of them and they can look at the copy of the IEP, the assessment at the same time. I think another important part too is to talk about whether or not the team agreed or disagreed, because when those assessments come in, those are recommendations by the school psychologist and by the service providers. It's an IEP team decision about what services and that the student requires and eligibility as well. So I think documenting the team as in agreement with the report is also something that should be documented.
John, one more thing I also would document here, in addition to saying that the parent received a copy of the report, I might include whether or not the parent requested a copy of the report to be translated for them, because on occasion we do have parents that request reports be translated for them following the meeting.
Now, Crystal, would you ask them at every meeting or would you wait for the parent to make the request?
I ask my parents at every meeting, would you like this to be translated for you? Because I want to be consistent in asking that question and documenting their request.
I think we also want to make sure that we document if a parent has been provided a translated or English copy prior to the IEP meeting. We want to make sure that we document that as well.
And I would add to that, make sure they get the final copy of the report at the meeting, because often there are changes that occur between when they're provided the draft copy and when they receive the final copy.
Absolutely.
That's a good point, Crystal.